Heidi, you ready to go? All right. Well, welcome to our undeniable session today, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Kate Wade with Get Her Hired, and today we are talking about something so incredibly fun, leadership style. We've got a former colleague of mine here, Heidi Garside. We worked together back when I was working in corporate, and I've always known that Heidi is one of the smartest people in the room. And I think that's why, like, back when we were in corporate too, we had a little headbutting situation, but
Oh, for sure.
here's an example of how you can mature beyond that because you actually realize this other person is a really kick-ass cool woman. And so that's what we get to do. That's not how I meant to intro you, Heidi, but that's the intro we've got now.
Well, and that's the honest truth. Yep. You kind of
Well,
know who's
welcome in.
you kind of know who's going to be kick ass when you butt heads with them because they're
Yes.
also pretty strong.
Well, let me tell you what we're going to be talking about today is that every leader has a pattern. How do you decode your leadership pattern? And so that's what we're going to be working on with Heidi today. So, Heidi works with individual leaders and teams and organizations to strengthen leadership, drive organizational effectiveness, and build the kind of cultures where people and performance thrive. Heidi helps leaders fix what actually breaks organizations like wasted time, misaligned money, under-leveraged people, or lost impact. And her work often includes leadership diagnostics, which she's done on me, everybody, so this should be fun. She works on team coaching, process alignment, and strategic advisory for change and growth initiatives. Heidi's on a mission to build clear, courageous leaders who know their worth and lead like it, especially in systems that don't always make this easy, which is exactly, I think our audience can just completely relate to that. You help your clients cut through the noise, own their voice, and drive meaningful change without losing themselves in the process. And through her firm, Think Hard Solutions, Heidi offers coaching, HR advisory services, and practical tools to help leaders and organizations move forward with courage, clarity, and accountability. So today, we are going to talk through these leadership patterns. Heidi's going to give us some insights so we can have some more information about how to identify our patterns, spot when they show up in our work, and how we can turn this into our edge. So, I've just said a whole lot of stuff about Heidi. Heidi, what else should we know about you? What else is going on that we need to know about Think Hard and about the work that you're doing?
Well, some of the things that I think hopefully make me more credible is that, I was one of those leaders who had to kind of come through the dark and become more self-aware. And
Mm.
for people who may have been on one of my teams, especially when I was starting out, they might even be like, she is teaching people how to be leaders. She is coaching people how to be more self-aware. And that's because I had to make it through some of that fragile ego time frame where I, really learned to become aware and at peace with those things that truly make me who I am and understand the stories I tell myself about myself so that I can live
Yeah.
with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so powerful. We see it so frequently in it just in the world right now, how people don't take ownership for mistakes they've made, and how that actually makes you less of a leader, less credible. And we're all here kind of anyone who says it's not their first rodeo, it's all our first rodeo. We've got one life here, and we have the opportunity to change. I know I've made a lot of change in my life as well, right? And learned a lot of things along the way. And I can look back and go, oh yeah, that was dumb. And with the grace and dignity of my own experience, I'm able to then help others now too. And so I appreciate that about you, Heidi, and I appreciate that about our relationship now as well. Before we go any further, how do you, let's just define parameters, because I think that something that is helpful is to think about what is a leadership pattern. So can you just define that for us before we go any further? Because I want to make sure we're talking in the same language here today.
Yeah. So when we talk about leadership patterns, most of the time, so if I just back up a little bit and talk about what an engagement looks like for me, I usually start a coaching engagement with an assessment, which really helps us to kind of ground ourselves in a common language. And the assessment I like to use most, and it's not the only assessment that I use, but the assessment I use most in those individual coaching conversations is a Hogan assessment, which is the same assessment I used on UK. Now, I can
Ah,
use DISC assessments, which I use sometimes too. I use 360s pretty often. I also, use the IDI to talk about cultural competency. So there's a lot of different assessments that can be done, but I use the Hogan Core 3 the most often. And it gives us kind of data points to really understand, what are your natural strengths? What are your natural derailing behaviors? So, what do your behaviors look like under stress? And what's motivating you right now? And so we
mhm.
can look at these, and it gives us about 150 data points, really about 50 kind of major scales and about 100 different subscales to look at, what does this really look like for this person? What is the pattern? Now we have data. The data is completely neutral, and Hogan is built to tell us about your likely reputation more than it
Mm.
is to tell us about how you feel about yourself. It doesn't tell me what are
Oh,
those stories you're telling you about you. It's telling me what is likely to be your impact on other people. What is the story they hear about you? And so that helps us to have that conversation because then I get to ask you questions. I get to take you through those data points. And then we get to have that kind of back and forth. And I can start to see the gaps between you know, how you're framing it up and what the data really says. Um,
mm-hmm.
and we're not going to argue. Most of the time, I'm going to trust you that you know better than I know. But sometimes it happens where you might have three or four or 15 different data points that say the same thing, and you are maintaining that that is not true. And the likelihood is that it is. And so I know we have some work to do there. I'm not going to push you if you maintain that that's not true. I'm going to, kind of squirrel it away and go, okay, so we're going to have to work on that one and really get some more information about that. I'm
Ah,
not in the business of pushing people before they're ready to accept some
yeah.
story about themselves. And I can always assume too, and I'm very curious in terms of um, did it get it wrong? Because it could have. It's not
Hmm.
perfect.
Well, we worked together. You did a full you full Hoganed me. You gave
I
me the
full
full
Hogan do.
Hogan.
Yeah. Yep. Full
It
Hogan.
sounds like a WWE like wrestling move, the
It
full
does.
Hogan.
It does. That might be fun too, though, Kate.
Yeah, I'd rather sit and eat popcorn.
Right?
Um, but it was really helpful and illuminating for me to see where, yeah, I think I have a strength in an area, but what is the derailer on that? Also, how are other people perhaps perceiving what I think is a strength? And we can get more into that. Definitely. You can actually full Hogan. You can share the full Hogan here if you need to. I'm fine with that. But let's go over to some poll questions if you don't mind. I want to see what's going on, what's top of mind in our audience here today. So I'm going to share about, I think there's 5 different questions. And this just helps Heidi and I understand what kind of level of things we're dealing with here. So far we're getting responses that some people are somewhat aware of their leadership patterns. They have hints, but they're not very aware. They can't necessarily name it. And this is anonymous, so please go ahead and do this. And any questions you have, just so you know, you can put them in the chat. They'll be anonymous, or you can use the Q&A function, also anonymous. So any of these things are anonymous. So please bring all your dumb questions. And then please also do these poll questions. So what we're seeing is people are somewhat aware. Just going to make a note of that. They have hints, but they don't. Oh, we just got one clocking in at very aware. Okay. Okay. So that is one thing we'll be looking at today is we've got some ideas about what's going on, but maybe we could get a little bit more clarity. Now the next question is when you're under pressure, which response best describes you? You freeze, you look for consensus, you take control and move fast. That would be me. I take control and move fast. um, Powering through, maybe it's situational. Okay, okay. So let's see. Oh, we're getting some interesting responses here. We're kind of all across the board, Heidi. We've got some fast action takers. Some people are the true in that space where it's situational. They're not going to commit to their leadership style
Mm-hmm.
right this
Mm-hmm.
moment. That's okay. Um, we don't have anybody looking for consensus. Good. I think good because that takes too long. Okay. I'm sorry.
According to
Heidi,
Kate, according to
Hogan
Kate,
means
that takes
later.
too long. FYI,
Now you all know a little bit about me.
you do.
Okay. Which kind of leadership do you feel is your biggest strength? So we've got answers flying in here. Looks like we've got communication, people development, execution. So some people that are really great with that communication, influence, and then execution, people development. All right. All right. Very good. All right. We got one strategic thinker as the leadership strength. I like that. Okay. Um, Now team perspective of leadership. How does your team or how do others, if you're not working right now, that's okay. Think about the teams you've been on. How would they describe your leadership style? I like to say, what if you had a work bestie, how would your work bestie describe it? And maybe if you've ever done a 360, how would your worst enemy describe it?
Mm, mm.
Okay, so most people on here are have gotten feedback or they believe that they're supportive and relationship driven. Some people feel that their leadership is seen as calm and steady. Some is analytical and thoughtful, but most people on the call here today are saying supportive and relationship driven. Okay. And then finally, last question. What's your biggest goal for today? So now that we know all this about you, if you could take something away from this session today, obviously, most people on this call are somewhat aware of their leadership patterns or their leadership style. They have some hints of it. Oh, we've got an overwhelming response here, Heidi, in that people want to understand how their pattern helps or hurts them.
I love that. I love that
Mm.
because we'll find out at the end of this, at the end of the webinar, how you might be able to do that for you personally.
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. That is so cool. All right. So now we've got a feel for what's happening in our audience here today. So we've got people that are, for the most part, they've got some insight into how they lead and what their patterns might be. We've got a lot of people that are taking control when there's pressure and moving fast. Most people on this call are really strong with communication and influence. We've got most people are perceived as supportive and relationship driven leaders. And of course, when they want to know what patterns they have and how they help or hurt them. So, okay, we know who's here now. So, Heidi,
Yeah.
Let's talk about this some more.
Okay.
With what we've got going on, you know, I don't think we really got into why you're doing this work. So tell us for a minute, why are you doing this? And do people frequently know, like, so the answers we got here, are these kind of frequent answers you get? Are we kind of on point with these? So tell us a little bit why you do this, and then are what we talking about here common things you encounter?
Okay. So first, let me talk about why or kind of how I came to do this work because I didn't set out to go, I think I'm gonna coach people. In fact, I would have thought I was the least qualified person in the world to do that. And in fact, my career in corporate was as an HR executive. And when I left, I had about 120 people kind of reporting up into my organization, and that was the farthest thing that I ever thought would happen to me, and certainly not being in HR. I never thought I would end up in HR. um I went to school thinking I would be a talk show host. I grew up on an Indian reservation in South Dakota. And really, in my graduating class, only three of us really got to go to college. And it was about 8 hours away. And so when I came out here, I hadn't even driven in a place with stoplights. So, imagining a corporate career with, in a Fortune 250 company was, beyond what I would have ever thought. So, everything that's ever happened to me has happened just because I'm, whatever the next opportunity is, I'm open to it. By the way,
Yeah.
there is a personality aspect that I can see when I give you a Hogan to see if that is likely to be you. If you're going to be a person that is likely to build your career very steadily and purposefully, or if you're a person to be like, I am open to whatever's next. I might do this and I might do that. Um, and I got into this work because when I left corporate, I decided I was going to do some HR advisory work. I was doing some project work and kind of not really stumbling, but like doing the work and going, I'm not sure where I want to focus. And I
Mhm.
ended up doing some coaching. And as I started doing that coaching, I was realizing, you know what, I'm not that good at not giving advice. What's happening is these people are becoming very dependent on my advice and they're not listening to me anyway. And what you learn as a coach is it's actually not my job to give advice. It's my job to help you understand, that
Mhm.
you already know what you want to do, that you already have the power inside you to make a choice, that I can't possibly understand all of the variables of your personality, your situation, what's happening with you at work to tell you what needs to come next. I can ask you
Mhm.
all the right questions though. I can be absolutely supportive and only want the best for you. I can, say, "Hey, that doesn't sound right. I'm not sure you're speaking from a truthful place. That doesn't seem right." So that's kind of how I got into this work. The more I was coaching people and especially executives, the more I was realizing, wow, this is really meaningful work to me. I really want to be
Yeah.
supportive to these individuals and get them as far as they can go. Does that
Yeah.
answer the
Yeah.
question? I feel like that was a lot of words.
Mm. It does, because you shared really that trajectory being what most people would consider untraditional. I also have a very untraditional background. It's probably another reason why we
You
get
do.
get along.
Yeah.
And um, I think that I like normalizing that, because a lot of women who come to get her hired are afraid of that non-traditional background and what other people's perception again might be if they have a non-traditional background, that's not linear or it has gaps, right? And so those are some fears that might limit or derail you potentially.
Yeah.
But also it's helpful to know why this is. so important to you and why you're so good. It also explains why you're so good at it because you really care and you want to
I really
not
do.
misadvise. You don't want to misadvise.
Right.
And I think that that is, it's almost like the Hippocratic oath, for that doctors take, do no harm. And that's also been an oath that I try to follow, do no harm to people that are working with us. So yeah, thank you for that. And so what you saw here today in the poll responses, is this pretty common for what you see when you're talking to people that kind of know what but they're not
Yeah.
sure really what their derailers are and what their patterns are?
So it's common that people have patterns in feedback. They've heard this before. So when I give them the feedback or I'm debriefing on a 360, they've generally heard the feedback before. There's only been a couple of cases where they're like, the feedback's very strong and they're like, oh, what? I've never heard this before. But really most people have heard it before. What they don't really tend to understand is the impact on others,
Hmm.
that how they're impacting others in terms of how they're getting their work done, how they feel about their jobs. This is where we start to label our bosses as toxic, as
Oh yeah.
unaware. And that's usually because these bosses aren't starting out to go, I think I'm going to ruin my team's life today. They're usually unaware of their impact, of their interpersonal impact.
Yeah.
They're usually operationally sound. They're usually like understand how to get the job done. What's what's missing is their ability to understand how they're impacting the people around them.
Okay. So that's pretty common then. I don't
Pretty
know.
common.
Does anyone here, you can put in the chat, do you have a toxic boss or have you had a toxic boss? And then I have another question. So if you want to put in the chat if you've had a toxic boss, um, or if you think you've had one in the past, throw that in there. And then second, we've got some, yep, we've got some comments on, yes, there have been toxic bosses. How many of you think you might be the toxic boss?
That is a great question. Truly.
I've definitely been the toxic boss. Oh, we got another one. Yes, learned a lot of what not to do as a leader from that toxic boss. Yeah. Um, Heidi, I've told you this, and you know this about me, and I've told everyone about this because this was part of my learning and development as a leader and my leadership awareness was at one point in my career, I was told that I was a controlling prima donna. And I thought that was a compliment. I thought that was the best compliment ever that I was a controlling prima donna. I was that toxic.
I remember us talking about this. Yes.
It's me. I'm the problem. Hopefully my team doesn't feel that way. If they do, we're open to discussion because we kind of have a hilarious vibe here over at Get Her Hired. We're very open over here.
I mean, and that's I can remember what mine were, and that was you opened with I'm smart. I love to think I'm smart. It turns out I'm a lot less smart than I ever thought I was, and as I get older, I'm even less smart. Um, but that was my signature, you know, quality. And I thought that because I was so smart, the rest of whatever it is I brought to the table was just what people had to put up with. That's what made me special. And
Yeah.
it turns out that, and you don't have to change who you are to bring that quality, but under stress, we revert to who we are in survival, right? We revert to those behaviors that we found some success in, even though we're not in that same spot anymore. So we lean into these things that are strengths for us. For me, it was, kind of taking charge, you know, le- doing everything, having super high standards, being very direct and because like we don't want to be inefficient around here. And really just, getting the stuff done and thinking, oh, that's my signature. And
Yeah.
under stress, doing that even more. like
Mhm.
leaning in harder instead of realizing that under stress is the time where I probably need to back off of that, that I'm coming across as harsh, unempathetic. And, I would get feedback that I was harsh and unempathetic. And I was just like, these people don't understand. Turns out that they understood just fine. It was me who didn't understand.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what we're really working toward, helping people understand about themselves.
Yeah. So Heidi, you've worked with hundreds of people,
Hmm.
and what do you see anything for women in leadership positions that comes up frequently as a theme, something that women in particular maybe need to understand how they're perceived, or using it as a strength, or is it a derailer? What are some themes you see for
Yeah.
women?
For women, there's a couple of things that I noticed for women. I think I mentioned this in, our debrief, and that is that there's this aspect on the Hogan about confidence. And a lot of times what we'll see is that confidence might be low for women. And it's a subscale. It's not like super and overarchingly important, but it tells me a little something about how you might come across to your team. And it's on this major scale called ambition. And when you're super high on ambition, you kind of show up like that basics business school bro, like follow me. I have the answers. I know the way. I should be the leader. I'm destined to be the leader. I can get us through this. We need to win at all costs. That's kind of high ambition. And lower ambition doesn't mean that you have low ambition. It's really about how your energy around ambition shows up. But you're going to tend to be a leader who leads from the sidelines, leads
Mhm.
through alignment, leads through your team taking in information. And, maybe it takes longer for you to get things decided, but you're willing to take more information in.
Okay.
And when you have that lower confidence measure, well, you might suffer, you might feel some suffering. It's also a strength that helps you because your team feels much more comfortable disagreeing with you, bringing you
Yeah.
information, bringing you ideas. And so that little marker tells me something about how you might come across. And so there's something about seeing this data that often women want to go right into, oh, I got to fix that about myself. And I tell them,
Hmm.
hang on, let's take it as neutral data.
Hmm.
Let's just like take it in and think about what
It's so
is
hard to
it
do,
is
taking
really
it in
hard
as
to do.
neutral.
But here's how it shows up in the most positive way. So do we
Yeah.
really want to fix that? And
Yeah.
so let's take it all in before we make some decisions about where we want to focus. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I see for women. And then the other thing is, they tend to over-index on self-monitoring, and
Okay.
under-index on strategic signaling. So really, they come across differently than they think. They often lead with capability and responsibility, but organizations read patterns, not intentions. So a pattern of
Ooh, say that again.
overfunctioning,
Organizations read
patterns,
patterns, not
not
intentions.
intentions.
Okay.
So a pattern of overfunctioning really gets framed as dependable. She's so dependable,
Ooh,
and not strategic, right? And so
that
a
is so
pattern,
interesting because so many people, sorry, Heidi, I just totally
go
interrupted you,
ahead.
but I
Yeah.
hear from so many women who are so overly competent, over functioning, capable of like
Yeah.
doing 20 jobs. They describe themselves as that Swiss Army knife and they're proud of it. And I'm like, well, there's okay, so it's not like it's a bad thing. However, that is
No.
so interesting that that pattern gets seen as that dependable. And so then frequently what
And
I
tactical,
see,
right? Dependable and tactical and operational, right?
yes.
When you're that Swiss Army knife.
And then the women I talk to are not getting promoted because of that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the outcome is you don't get
Yeah.
promoted.
And then a pattern of consensus really gets framed as collaborative, but not decisive, right?
Mm.
So naming your pattern really lets you kind of take back that narrative. So if you can see that about yourself, You get to put words to that narrative. You get to talk about it openly. You get to
Mhm.
tell people how to talk about it. And then when
Mhm.
you get talked about in those talent assessment conversations, they're going to use the words that you programmed them to use. That's what
Yes,
we want, right?
that's what we want. Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Um, so over-indexed on self-monitoring, under-indexed on strategic signaling, is something that can happen a lot. That is so fascinating. And at the end of the call today, Heidi's got information on how you can dig in a little bit more on this, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
I want to know, has anyone gotten feedback that's confused them, or maybe you've got received um, a review, a performance review, or maybe someone has shared with you something that they've been critical about you, and you're wondering how that might have come about and how you might be able to adjust that. So if you want to add a note in the chat or in the Q&A, please do. We just got a love note that came in that someone is sharing that one of the highest compliments they ever received came from 360 feedback, where someone said that my greatest strengths were making people feel appreciated. And she thinks about this all the time. The person said she leads to help others grow and walks by your side rather than in front of you. Wonderful. How do you read that, Heidi? How might you interpret that?
Immediately, just so you know, I go to those Hogan scales are in my head. Already know that this person is gonna show up as low to moderate ambition, which is generally gonna show up as consensus, as well as some interpersonal sensitivity, which means that this person has, feels for others. And the fact that it was really important to her tells me about her motivators, the MVPI. The motivators would be like altruism. Once I talk to people about what's motivating them today, it starts to get really interesting because I can talk to you about your natural strengths, your natural derailing behaviors and how do you monitor and manage. And then what really actually motivates you today? What's motivating you to behave that way? And this person clearly is motivated by, at least by those, and maybe others, but those altruistic tendencies, wanting to be supportive, wanting to help others, and perhaps even affiliation, connection to others. So it starts to get me like, okay, what would be most helpful to this person in terms of as they continue to grow?
Well, if that person wants to write it, I think Heidi, you're like reading a crystal ball here for people. I mean, the way you're able to evaluate just a little statement like that, because I know we did the full Hogan on me,
Yeah.
and I was like, this is so creepy, and yes, this is true, and yes, this is true, and yes, this is good to know, but just so cool, so
Yeah, I
cool.
just pulled
Amory,
yours up just for
oh
instance, and you
yeah,
said I
for
could share.
funsies,
Yeah.
share, yeah.
So, for Kate, we see that her biggest motivators, and by the way, your personality doesn't change that much over time. I'm all bought into the growth mindset, by the way. You can grow and you can learn. We're human beings. But your personality doesn't change that much without some really focused work over time. It can
Mhm.
change, but these are only going to change slightly over time. And it's about kind of managing those derailing behaviors. Also, for the derailing behaviors, we want you to have some. If you don't, you're going to be a very boring person and a very hard leader to follow because you have no oomph. You have none of that stuff that really makes people want to follow you. Nothing interesting. So we want to see those. But your
Mhm.
motives, preferences, and values, and really they're your motives, they change the most over time. And
Mm.
where Kate is today is she has the highest motivation on altruism. I mean, truly and ultimately wants to help people. It motivates her every day. I mean, that is the thing that makes her do what she does most days. But her second highest is what we call aesthetics. And that reads as high quality product, high quality work, creativity, cool stuff. And so, if you can count on anything about Kate today, it is really about helping people with really cool stuff.
I
It is
like
just
this.
really,
Yes.
really like cutting edge, innovative stuff.
And
So
that's true. That's what we're doing. I think the team would agree that high quality, that experience is important. The respect and how we see others and hear them. It's incredibly important. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Thank you
won't
for
talk about your
that.
derailing behaviors, at least not yet. Not until you make me mad. I'm just kidding.
No, it was really helpful to know my derailing
Yeah,
behaviors,
yeah.
actually.
I know. I'm just teasing. You were very open.
Amory, it says we have a question. Amory, can you read that out loud for us? It sounds like we have a Q&A question that came in. And anyone who's got a question, please go ahead and pop into the chat or into the Q&A. Amory, can you read that for us? Are you available?
Yes, it says, as leaders reflect on strengths and derailers, what's a helpful mindset for them to bring into this kind of self-exploration?
Mm, helpful
This is
mindset.
such a great question. Um, the most helpful mindset, if this can possibly be done, and sometimes this is so hard, is to remember that this data is neutral. This isn't telling
Yeah.
us a story about you. And these patterns aren't a prison. They're not, forevermore, this is how everyone's going to experience you. You get to manage these experiences of people, but also remembering that this data is neutral. That as we talk about the likely experience that people are having or your likely reputation, remembering that for every, what you might consider criticism or negative side, there is a positive side of that. For every strength you have, there's also an overuse behavior.
Hmm.
You might be the person who gets things done and who is amazing at like just really hitting every single one of your goals at the end of the year and knocking it out of the park, but you also get feedback that you are, unempathetic, that, I'm talking about myself, obviously, unempathetic, that you might be leaving bodies everywhere, that push your team too hard to the point of burnout. And so there's always this yin yang. So remember that for every negative criticism, there's something really strong that happens for you too. And so that
Hmm.
mindset of how do I balance these things? And when I get feedback, it means that there's probably something that just tipped over on the other side, and remembering that the data is neutral. It's always
Okay.
neutral.
The data is neutral. Thank you for that. That's a very helpful perspective. A lot of women we work with here at Get Her Hired have gotten toxic feedback from people, or over kind of like over fawning feedback that is actually also not very
Not
helpful.
helpful. Right.
And knowing that either way, though, it's kind of neutral and it's what am I going to take from it? What do I want to do differently, if anything? Because sometimes feedback can be crap.
It is. I'm one of those coaches who will not tell you that every piece of feedback is a gift. The pattern is a gift. So, when you get that fawning feedback, and that reminds me that the data is neutral. Like, if you're getting overly fawning feedback and that's all you're getting, there's
Oh,
a
okay.
message in that too, that
Ooh,
people are not giving you feedback. They're not doing it. And you got to ask yourself, why am I not getting feedback? I recently had a client who said, I don't get feedback. I said, do you ask for feedback? Yeah, but nobody gives me feedback. And I said, well, there's some reflection that needs to happen right now, that where you should be asking yourself why they're not giving you feedback. There's no doubt in my mind that you're a high performer. So I'm not calling that into question. But I
mm-hmm.
want you to just call into question why people are not giving you feedback. Even if it's, here's this observation I made that you might not know about yourself or something that happened in a meeting.
Yeah,
Everyone should want you to be the best you can be, especially your boss.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So interesting. Thank you, Heidi. I that is, the patterns that you're talking about here and those leadership patterns and how those signals come across to others. I think it's something we could all just be more aware of. And that self-awareness, though, is hard. What does it take to be open to self-awareness, do you think, Heidi? What kind of like things do you see in people that are good at doing this and not good at doing it, but like are open to and actually accept? Or, you know, what do you find that you have people that just resist this and will not listen to the feedback?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about before, my business model is B2B, so business to business. And so most of the time I get brought in by a manager and well, I'd say about half the time I get brought in by a manager to take somebody through an assessment. And then perhaps a coaching engagement after that. And then about half the time I brought in for a coaching engagement by an individual into the business, usually sponsored by the business.
Mm.
Um, and so a lot of times when the manager wants to take the person through the assessment, what the manager is actually looking for is the right language to describe what the behavior pattern that they're seeing. And a lot of times managers have a hard time managing when they don't have hard data, like you didn't meet your goal or you didn't make those calls, 50 out of 100 times or something. And so what I try and help them with is here's the pattern that, here's how you might help them the most. Here's what motivates them. Here's the pattern behind that. And so we might take them through an assessment. And different assessments have different confidentiality levels. So a 360 is 100% confidential in terms of it's for development purposes. We only share the results with the participant. We take them through the debrief, and if they want to go through and their organization is amenable, we take them through the development phase, and then kind of coach them through making those shifts.
Mhm.
Um, and so, you know, what might happen is that the person, you can see immediately that the person is just not in a space where they can
Yeah.
consider that this
Yeah.
feedback is accurate and true. So you'll notice that immediately and that this is going to end with the debrief. But what I just have faith in is that, we planted some seeds, that we called out some patterns. And every time I enter those debriefs, I try and, start them with empathy and understanding for the person in terms of the place that they are.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's so with each bit of feedback, depending on my awareness, if I speak from my experience, it's depending on my awareness, my openness to it. Um, I can't unhear it, right? So it's not something I can unknow. And again, if it's neutral, right? It's not good or bad. It's just how am I in the right place what place am I in order to receive that message? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, we got a question that came in. Uh, you've touched on this a little bit already, but do leadership patterns shift over time, or is it something that's typically fixed in a person's personality? So I think this person's asking, is it possible for me to change?
The answer is absolutely. We're humans, and I am absolutely bought into the growth mindset. If anyone has not read the book by Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset, go and read that book. It's a game changer. I'm bought in. We can all make changes. Your personality is pretty set though, like who you are and what you're naturally going to gravitate toward, and your
Yeah.
derailing behaviors under pressure, you're going to gravitate toward those behaviors. You
Yeah.
can learn how to manage them and you can learn how to become more self aware. Self awareness is always going to be the key. The
Yeah.
more self aware you are, the easier it becomes to manage. The more self aware you are, the less likely you are to let emotionality take over.
Mhm. Thank you. I have a question for you. Heidi. And if anyone else has questions about any feedback they've received, please go ahead and put it in the question Q&A function, or you can just use the chat here. It's anonymous. Questions for Heidi about feedback or perception or leadership. We want to hear what's going on for you. Heidi, I forgot my derailers already because here, and this is probably common. I bet people forget their derailers because we don't want to focus on it because to me it's a negative thing. The one I remember that has been so helpful for me, and maybe my team will now know this. My team can chime in if they've noticed a change in me on this. But something you shared with me is that I can appear to be not receptive to feedback and input. And I thought a lot about that. And in the last couple of months have really changed how I'm showing up to receive and hear um, feedback and input from people. And so hopefully my teams observe that change. But what else were my other derailers? Remind me so I can do some more work here, Heidi.
And to just, not to put too fine a point on it, I think that your feedback was not that you were feedback defensive, even. It was more that you were feedback resistant,
Yeah,
that you
feedback
get
resistant.
feedback and you understand that everybody's got an opinion and you kind of keep it moving. And that's because you have a higher adjustment score. And you were not remembering your derailers. You're like, it might be kind of common. It's actually kind of common for people who have higher adjustment scores who don't tend to give into emotionality. And that
Ah,
is you. People who have lower adjustment scores and higher excitable scores, and not all of you are going to know what that means, but they are going to be people who tend to remember what their derailers are. They're
mm,
going to remember the more kind of negative feedback more than they're going to
mhm.
remember like what are the positive like outcomes. But yours were, where you were highest in terms of derailing behaviors were on the colorful scale and imaginative scale, which means that when you're under
Yes.
pressure, your personality leads. You are a memorable person who has lots of incredible experiences, and your personality, which is already big, it gets bigger under pressure.
Yeah,
You might
forgot about
be,
that one.
not sure what you're supposed to do, and so you let your personality lead and you're imaginative. Those ideas that you have, they get more out there. They get
Yeah.
more,
They-
they get bigger, they get crazier, and we just don't understand what the heck you're talking about. And so you lose us. And when you're under pressure, you kind of lose that ability to bring us along. You're about 70 steps ahead of us in the future, and we have no idea where the heck you went.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I think my team is probably laughing right now because they know all this about me already. Uh, because I go in those places and my team's like, can we just do one thing? Just can we do one thing? And I'm like, no, let's do 20.
Now we pair that with that high quality, like cool experience
Right.
for the users. And we've got this
Yeah.
person who is just like operating way up here. Yeah.
Oh, we got feedback from someone on my team. Actually, one of my team members wrote in a note um, that I gave feedback about how some of the ways I work can inadvertently cause confusion and challenges for them. And they gave me that feedback that sometimes the way I work um, inadvertently causes confusion. And so I don't know if anyone else on the call here can relate to that. That, like you just said, Heidi, I'm 70 steps ahead, and I'm like, oh, that's right. I have to go back and make sure my team members are we're in the same boat and they're not trailing behind in a canoe, you know. I've got the speedboat going.
And you went in seven different directions and you have all these ideas and nobody knows which, where you went.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's been a good learning for me as a leader with my team, and with other people. It's like, okay, I get to be more what do I want to say? Because it's a very positive experience for me. How it makes me feel, Heidi, is much more connected.
Yeah.
It makes me feel much more like a team member myself and less alone. So, and that is one of the hardest things when
Love
leading a
that.
small business, as you know, it's like you can feel
Yeah.
so alone. But
Yeah.
now that I've gotten that feedback and I've learned how to adjust and do some work on my derailers, it's been really helpful for me.
I love that. Thank you for telling me that. That's one of mine is one of my motivators is adding value. So it's
Oh
more this
yeah,
recognition. And so hearing that, and I don't get to hear it very often because I'm in the background. So I've had to learn to come to peace with that part of myself that I just have
yeah,
to feel like I did a good job because I'm not always going to hear it. So thank you
right.
for telling me that.
Well, and you're welcome, and thank you, and thank you. You guys, everyone can get some information and insight from Heidi. Like we've got some time. If anyone wants a crystal ball reading on your leadership style, please write in a note now because we've got maybe 5 minutes left with Heidi here today, and we want to make sure if you've got a burning question about feedback you received or about your leadership style, we want to address that because I know one of the biggest things people wanted to know today was how their pattern hurts or helps them. That was something people wanted to leave with today. So as we wait to see if anyone has a burning desire here, Heidi, can you talk about how to know how our pattern hurts or helps us? So if the data is neutral and there's a pattern happening, I imagine that someone might have some emotional um, relationship to this pattern that they know it's either hurting or helping them. Can you talk a little bit about that and how these patterns hurt and help us?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I think it's worth just saying out loud, and it's probably just neophytic to say this, but it's just worth repeating that every pattern has a positive and a negative. Every single pattern. And so regardless of how good you think you are at your job, there are things you're doing that aren't so good, no matter what. And now everybody's going to say, yeah, yeah, of course, of course. But that's really hard for people to accept sometimes, especially if they see themselves as a high performer. So I just want to put that out there. And that depending on how emotional of a person you are, and like I said, I can see how likely you are to be emotional, to have an emotional response, from the data in the Hogan. Um, and it's on a scale of 1 to 100. uh, you may have a hard time getting past the fact that you heard some negative feedback and you have an emotional response to it. You might have that trigger happen. These assessments cannot account for intellect and maturity. So I will never know how smart you are or how mature you are when we get to that. So when I enter these, I can see the pattern, but I don't know if you're going to be smart or mature. So I'm always careful. But I just want every person to know that there is potential and there are gifts that every person has. And so you may hear the negative thing depending on your emotional response, but it's always worth, and I always make sure I repeat what the positive side of that is going to be. So I don't know if that
Yeah,
answered your
that's so
question.
helpful. That's
Yeah.
so helpful. We got a couple notes, love notes in here. One says, when I'm under pressure, I tend to become more cautious and can unintentionally slow my team down. What strategies would you recommend to avoid becoming a bottleneck in those situations? Ooh, someone gets more cautious and slows the team down by accident.
Well, the fact that the person's aware is very important. And cautious is a scale on the HDS, so you can kind of start to see that. And I would also want to see what other scales are kind of up and down. But the first step is that awareness. And then the first thing you want to do, and this is really hard, is share that with your team. Tell your team, this is my tendency, and I'm going to need you to help me manage
Yes,
this. And that is the
yes,
very first thing that if you can possibly do that, you need to do that because you
yes,
can't trust yourself under pressure because you're going to think this isn't one of those times. This isn't one of those times. I'm not the bottleneck. So you need to be able to take in feedback, and your team needs to know it's safe to give you feedback.
Yes, yes. I think here at Get Her Hired, we're pretty clear on these things with each other. And it's so helpful when we can be that way and not judge it too and be like, hey, you guys, I'm highly aware that I have way too many ideas and I move too quickly. Can you tell me when that's bothering you? Or other people on the team say, hey,
Mhm.
my tendency is to do this. And can you help me understand when I'm getting in the way? Or something like that. Or I ask too many questions, or, it's really good because then we're a small team, small enough team where we can really work together on that. It's a wonderful way to have a stronger relationship together and do better work for our clients,
Yeah.
really.
Some of my clients are in, more, bigger organizations, and some of those industries are just formal in their
Yeah,
culture. And
yeah,
so those can tend to be hierarchical. And so they just
yes.
don't have that permission. So they need to be explicit.
Yes, yeah, I love that. We've got couple more burning desires coming in. A person has completed the Hogan assessment and they have a high altruistic value of 77.
Yeah.
How do I protect myself from being taken advantage of?
Oh, that's such a
Ooh,
good question. So I can see from some of the other scales how maybe trusting you are, how likely you are to be skeptical, and so how likely it might be that you can be taken advantage of. And so if you know that is one of your tendencies that you can be taken advantage of, there's definitely some tools that you can put in place to be aware. What are the questions you want to ask? How do you reflect before you start sharing things that might be vulnerable? So, you really have to trust yourself to know whether or not this is a person you can trust or this is a group you can trust. And so, in order to do that, especially when you want to have that connection, and I would see if you have a high affiliation score, because if you have a high affiliation score, you're going to tend to want to connect and help. So you want to take some time out to really reflect about, okay, what am I feeling right now? What do I want to share? How vulnerable do I think I can be? Why am I slowing this down right now? And really check in with yourself because you actually know best.
mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think we've just got a couple minutes left. And Heidi, I wanted you to talk about this offer that you created for Get Her Hired. And so, Anne Marie, maybe you can put some notes in the chat here about how people find Heidi or follow her, etc. But before we wrap up, I want to clarify, Heidi about how she works because it's part of what makes her perspective so strong. And even though companies hire Heidi, her coaching work is one-on-one and it's confidential and it's deeply personalized. I mean, we work together on my Hogan and it just was so helpful to me. And of course, that's just the first part of it. The assessment's just the first part because then once you have all that juice, it's like, okay, now what do we do with it, right? And the organizations invest in her because they know that when one leader in the company grows, there's this ripple effect that strengthens the whole system. So for this community at Get Her Hired, we're of course here independently. We're not necessarily here on behalf of a company. But Heidi took some time and she created a leadership pattern quiz that you can do on your own. So if you're here or you signed up and you couldn't make it right now, we do have a leadership pattern quiz that will help you identify the pattern that you naturally lead from, and then how to talk about that pattern with confidence, especially in interviews or in new roles. And you're going to have this ready tomorrow. Tell us a little bit more about this and we'll make sure everyone gets the link for this.
Yeah, so we'll send out the link, and I know I've got to send that out to you guys. And when you go in and you'll answer about 10 questions, it will send you kind of this, here's what you would probably typically look like. Here's why it's great. Here are the watch outs around that. Here are some things to ask yourself, and a little kind of leadership guide for yourself in terms of how you might want to talk about this, how you might want to, talk to your team about it. So really some goodies that go with that. I wanted to make sure that I offered people something in terms of self-awareness because I really do work with B2B, and these Hogan assessments can be incredibly expensive. And I want to make sure that there's something that's accessible to people if they're not able to bring me into their organization.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Well, Heidi, Anne-Marie, thank you for posting her website and her LinkedIn. Please follow Heidi. And then what we're going to do is tomorrow, make sure that everyone who's registered gets the link for that quiz and how to follow up and find out more about the work that Think Hard Solutions is working on. Heidi, any final word of advice for people before we head out today on leadership patterns?
I just want to thank everybody for their time, but I want them to know that um, your pattern is never going to be the problem. Not knowing is. So you want to find out what that problem is. You want to become self-aware. That, my friends, will be your superpower.
I love it. Thank you so much, Heidi. Well, take
Thanks,
care,
Kate. It was so
everyone.
good to see you, and your
Good to
team
see
is
you too.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, have a great afternoon and evening and morning, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Thanks,
We'll see you
Heidi.
soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.